Season 1 of Disventure Camp was such a beauty that I really suggest you give it a second, third, or 18th rewatch because it was truly a gem. Season 3 instead, it's flawed. I'm sorry to say it because I adore animation cartoons and all the effort they put into their works, and I also believe that people really don't give them enough credit for what they do, but this season unfortunately had some pretty big issues. People even say that it feels like a step back compared to season 1. In my opinion though, it's not really fair to compare the two though. Season 1 was a remake of the beta version, so the writers already knew what went wrong there and they could easily fix it, changing the characters, their backgrounds, however they pleased, just to make the final product that excellent. All-Stars instead started with pretty much a handicap, aka the legacy of season 2, which, honestly, it was everything but a perfect season. Most characters were pretty one-dimensional, the elimination order made the second half of the season everything but tense and with such low stakes, and even certain stories ended up going nowhere or were simply too rushed. So, unlike season 4, which I can't wait to watch, All-Stars couldn't really start fresh from scratch. All-Stars of course had its moments and some pretty strong suits, like the excellent picks for the first boots, or even how, thanks to the finale, the motel, the comeback, and the first episode, every single character got a sufficient amount of screen time and no one was really forgotten, or even how well they mixed the two different casts. I even admit that the writers came up with some pretty genius and very original stories and plot points. Honestly, really, no concept this season felt like a bad idea, like something I never would have wanted to see. The issue perhaps is that these concepts weren't developed in the best of ways. Some concepts weren't given nearly as much screen time as they deserved, such as Ellie betraying Gabby's trust or Gabby's evil alter ego. Others were just hinted at but never developed or went anywhere, such as Hunter and Ellie's relationship issues, and a few were just dragged for the entirety of the season, taking up all the screen time without ever bringing something new or fresh to change things up, such as Jake and Allie's insecurities or Ria's evil persona. These last ones in particular, Jake, Allie, and Ria's problems, they're all interesting concepts, indeed, I'm not saying they're not, but the writers focus on them excessively without changing things up often enough. There just wasn't much variety to any of these stories, and I'd say this is probably the main issue with All-Stars if we just wanna pick one, because this unbalanced screen time management caused those few stories to be repetitive to a point where those campers are just annoying to watch, and at the same time, the other campers had less screen time to shine and tell cool stories of their own, because there were so many cool stories that didn't develop. They didn't have time to do that because Jake was hogging all the hate and the screen time, but mostly the hate. So today, we'll analyze every episode in detail and of course, focus on the eliminated contestant of the day, just like we did last time. In all this, I ask you guys to share your thoughts in the comments, but also remember to be nice. Critique, don't criticize. If there are some things you didn't like, you can just say it, but say it nicely. It's really important to share your thoughts and ideas and give Odd Nation Cartoons some feedback, because this way they have a clear idea of what could be improved in their future works. With that being said, let's get this retrospective started. Yes, Retrospective. Had Grett actually won, as she was supposed to, then this title would have made a whole lot of sense. But because the odds of Grett both coming back for yet another season and also winning it are rather slim, I've decided to call this a Retrospective anyway, even though, Grett is not the main focus. It might not make sense or not, my channel, my rules, if you got any complaints about that, you can shove them right up your alley. But enough of that. Episode 1 is mostly okay. Everyone gets a chance to shine, and we even see Rose and Will make cameos, and I always do like a good cameo. It's a nice change of pace from what we usually get, so yeah, I don't really mind it. My main issue with it though is that it's not really the most entertaining thing ever. There is way too much sitting around and not enough action or stakes yet. Of course, that's because this is the first episode of the season, and even the first episode ever without a challenge, so of course it can be as exciting as an episode with challenges, but nothing too unique really happens here. So I'd say that it's cool and chill, but not really captivating. It serves its purpose really well, and it does bring the viewers up to speed, telling us what's been happening over the last few years, so it's okay, it does stand out and tries to be original. No real complaints there. Episode 2 was excellent. The challenge is simple and fun, and it also allows for a lot of interesting interactions, and even the team dynamics are already very intriguing. The episode sets up Jake's jealousy perfectly, I'd say, because it starts off as Alec casually putting a bug in his ear, presumably in an attempt to get Team Magenta to fight and Fiore to remain under the radar, and he later just lets Jake's insecurities do all the work. The elimination doesn't feel forced, the dynamics that brought to it felt pretty natural given Jake's attitude and Ashley's kindness, so yeah, I totally buy it. Actually, James being the first eliminated contestant, it was a fantastic choice, 100% approved. He's absolutely the best pick for first boots, and I don't just say this because I couldn't care less for him, but also because the first few boots have got to be characters who have already given their all in previous seasons. People who have had a character journey that's now over. Of course, a previous winner is not gonna win again, so there's no point in letting him stay for too long, especially if he's brought everything he could to the table last season. Maybe he could have brought something else, but he didn't really need to, that's the thing. Someone like Connor or Ashley instead, they really did, given their placements in their respective seasons. James, overall, this season, he was admittedly very likable, even to me, which is crazy. I never thought I'd say that after season 2 came out. He didn't overstay his welcome, and during his very short stay on the show, in general, not only in the competition, but even the motel, the finale, he still managed to leave a mark and also leave with his head held high as he defended his boyfriend. Something that, in my opinion, fits so very well given his character journey in season 2. His relationship with Aiden has now become his #1 priority, and it shows, which is great. Again, flawless elimination, excellent choice for a first boot. Thumbs up. Episode 3 has another memorable challenge that stands out from the rest. I do love this different ambiance with everything happening underwater, and at first that wobbly effect looked so very weird to me, but now I kinda got used to it, and I gotta admit, it's pretty unique. There's so much they nailed with this episode. It's not my favorite, but it's pretty close, really. I love the callback to Ria's last scuba diving experience, Ashley preventing Jake from acting impulsively, the girls' alliance forming and going downhill in a few hours, and even Aldi and Hunter talking strategy together, or even Miriam and Alec sabotaging Team Cyan together to help out Jake and Fiore. This episode really couldn't be any better, really. Here too, I really gotta take my hat off to the writers, because Lake is another great pick for an early boot. A lot of people really like her, me included, I guess, but she's one of the very few characters who was neither an early boot in a previous season, nor had an unresolved storyline that absolutely needed closure. That's actually a crucial detail in my opinion. The other campers, one way or another, they all had some unfinished business that required them to stay. Lake didn't. She's had her arc last season, which was wrapped up very nicely, so she didn't need to stay any longer. But of course, not bringing her back for All-Stars, it would have felt a bit unfair in my opinion, especially if Rosa Maria too isn't competing, so this was a great choice. Plus, the elimination ceremony itself was both tense and exciting, and the reason behind the elimination made perfect sense in Universe 2, so I really can't be mad. This one really was impeccable. And in general, I do love that kind of chaos before the campers get voting. It always makes a ceremony memorable. And at this point you might think, wow, this guy must really enjoy this season, he hasn't said one bad thing about it yet. Yeah, yet. Episode 4, sucks to say it, it was pretty boring. Mostly due to the challenge being kinda repetitive and not particularly action-packed. I'd say it's really the most forgettable one of the season. All challenges with rounds, in my opinion, tend to feel kinda repetitive, but this one specifically felt also pretty uninspired. I'm sorry, it's just, it's the challenge I like the least. Pre-merge, obviously, because if we count post-merge challenges, well then, Episode 14 takes the cake. But it's not only that, we now got to a point where certain plot points start getting a little monotonous and repetitive. I gotta admit though that this episode, unlike the next ones, at the very least tries to keep things fresh by pretty much shifting the focus when it comes to these already established plot points. Jake's jealousy, for instance, gave Ashley a chance to open up and talk about her farm. Connor's dissatisfaction with Rhea made him and Alec open up too and talk about family. Same with Ali and Hunter finally taking action to get Fiore on their side. So same stories, new dynamics. The episode highlight is easily the villains alliance, an excellent idea that, however, wasn't handled in the best of ways. As long though as episode 4 is concerned, I guess the only issue I can find with this is that the alliance kinda got exposed a little too soon. I really would have preferred to have the alliance remain a secret for just a little while longer, even just one single episode. But that's it, really, that's mostly it when it comes to this specific episode. The alliance's fundamental issues kinda lie with the rest of the season and how little the alliance did over the next 15 plus episodes. Its potential was endless, we can agree on that. Having all these villains forced to cooperate, given their egos and their being untrustworthy, each with their own specific set of skills and strategies, it was pure gold. They could have been a dream team and also fantastic for content. Yet, all they did was pretty much just vote together. Which is fine, but you know, I keep thinking about the missed potential. For instance, how they did not scheme to take down the other teams. How did they not actively turn the good guys against one another instead of just waiting for them to tear each other down on their own? They were just so very lucky that Jake was around, otherwise they would have been toast, all of them. The way I see it, each villain shines in a different specific field, be it deception for Grett, sabotage for Rhea, strategizing for Alec, complete and utter lack of morals for Yul, manipulation for Ellie and Fiore, and even backstabbing for Gabby. Not because she's a backstabber, god no, she's the perfect human being, my sweet Gabby, but that totally could have been her role in the alliance, given how nobody would have ever expected her to be aligned with it. Yet, at the end of the day, none of these skills were really used in tandem with one another, or in some cases, at all. So, long story short, the alliance was a really cool addition, but it wasn't used to its fullest potential. Once again, I'm more than okay with this elimination. Miriam already won season 1, so it's a great idea to get rid of her soon, so the other campers have more time to shine. She as well didn't have a bullshit elimination or anything. Instead, she stood her ground, gave it her all to break up the villains alliance, and did not leave without putting up a fight. This really does her credit. And just like with Lake and James, she left in a very dignified way, if you will, which is something so very necessary for characters who shined in the past and are probably never gonna compete again. Everyone should have a satisfying send-off, ideally, but the first few booths should be prioritized in that regard, since they don't really have 10 or 12 episodes worth of content to leave a mark. Episode 5 is solid, mostly because the alliance being exposed helps keep things fresh, and it was fascinating to say the least to see Fiore and Ellie try to get themselves out of this pickle. What I did not love though were the challenge and the elimination. For the challenge, I think it would have worked way better had it had more portions, making it a pentathlon instead of triathlon. All 3 teams, after all, had 5 members now, so it seemed like a great occasion to make each camper shine on their own. Of course, by having the campers compete in pairs, they gave us some interesting interactions like Yul and Grett, Hunter and Jake, Ellie and Tess, or even Ali and Ashley, but all these totally could have happened at camp before or after the challenge. They were interactions between members of the same team, so we have plenty of time for those. Instead, it would have been way more interesting to have campers from opposing teams interact, which is pretty rare already given how the camps are very far away from one another. So imagine if for the first portion we had a Hunter versus Yul versus Tess bike race. Hunter and Tess could have talked about the Ali thing here, and they could have shared their common annoyance with Yul, something Hunter couldn't quite do with Jake. We also could have had a Gabby versus Grett versus Ali race, where Yul hands Grett the flag first and insults her in front of both Gabby and Ali, causing Carpet Muncher here to later catch up with her and inquire about her troubled relationship, only for Grett to shut her up and push her away. This already would have given Gabby a chance to see Yul's abusive personality and start feeling bad for Grett, and also a chance for Ali to compare her hate comments online with Yul's comments. We even could have had Jake compete against Tom, Rhea against Aiden, or even Alec against Ellie so that he could bring her up to speed with the whole Miriam matter and discuss the alliance being exposed. Unfortunately, one thing I don't love about the show is that pre-merge the campers don't get to interact much with people from opposing teams, which for a 13 episode season, it wasn't that big of a deal, but with 21 episodes instead, you either gotta have a team swap or you gotta let these people interact with other teams, because the character dynamics within a team can only get you so far, they can be entertaining forever, and I think this challenge would have been ideal for that. I also think it would have been, appropriate to see the villains sabotage the opposing teams, given how they're villains and they didn't do anything villainous all episode. I know Fiora and Ellie are still part of the Alliance, but for instance, targeting Team Cyan, in my opinion, would have been a pretty smart move. This way, Ellie could have easily gotten rid of Aiden and later Tom, thanks to her friendship with Tess and her relationship with Gabby. This way, the Alliance would have survived 2 more rounds without losing any of its members. And it also would have given Fiora some more time to, make an alliance with Hunter and Ali perhaps. Then the elimination, I'm not too crazy about. Hunter is a character who, in my opinion, had a whole lot of potential, yet the only things they made him do this season were bicker with Ali and hold a grudge against Fiora for being useless. Given how apparently this guy was always apparently meant to be the 4th boot of the season, I kinda have the impression that they really had nothing planned for him, and they only decided to make him and Ali fight just for the sake of drama. But I kinda have a feeling that they never really meant to take this tension between them anywhere. Especially because, come on, those two make up in the end, and it all comes out of nowhere. It feels so incredibly forced. They didn't solve their issues, they simply forgot about them, which is not healthy. So how am I supposed to like them together or want their relationship to last if we only see them fight? I don't know, had they gone for the throuple thing with Tess they initially planned for season 2, then I kinda would have cared more. Also, eliminating Hunter like this, in my opinion, feels pretty dumb. Just a little bit of a waste because the elimination could have been way better. Wouldn't it have been better, for instance, had Fiora used the totem to eliminate him instead? Jake, Ashley, Hunter, and Ali all could have worked together to get rid of her like they actually had planned during the episode, but Fiora could have fooled them all by using an immunity totem to save herself and get rid of Hunter, who was basically Fiora's biggest hater. The demon child obviously hates Ashley's guts, we know that, but Hunter has always been much ruder to her compared to Must Ashley here. So I really think that would have been enough for Fiora to target him instead. Also because this way she would have left Ali alone, making her the perfect ally to help her in the next elimination ceremony, so Hunter would have been an excellent pick. Maybe Grett or Alec could have found the totem and decided, or I don't know, they could have been forced by the other villains to share it with the rest of the Alliance so that they could keep their numbers advantage. And they could have decided to give it to Fiora to save her butt tonight. So a lot of missed potential in this episode. I'm okay with Hunter's placement, but I also think he could have stayed for 1 more episode to let him try to smooth things over with Ali, letting Connor get the boot tonight instead. More on Connor in a minute. Super cool challenge, very original, very unique, easily stands out. Let's say that I don't adore the songs and listen to them as often as I do with Phineas and Ferb music, it's Phineas and Ferb music, it's the best ever, but they are very enjoyable songs. Even the new character designs are interesting to look at, but what isn't too interesting though are the character interactions, because starting from episode 4 all the way to episode 9, the campers hardly have any conversations that move the story along. It feels like there's a whole lot of filler and the episodes are just uneventful, just waiting for the merge to happen. The first 3 episodes are the setup. The 4th and 5th one are all about the Villains Alliance, and there were some repetitive conversations there too, but it was acceptable. But starting from episode 6 all the way to episode 9, it seems like they ran out of stories to tell. You'll find characters often just stating what's going on, or having conversations and even plot points that go nowhere. Like Emily, for instance, helping Yul with Grett. It seemed like a huge deal at first. I imagine Grett would eventually get suspicious of Yul's sudden personality shift, of course, that she would investigate and eventually find out Emily was behind it. I thought she'd be furious and would want to break up with the guy, only for him to lie and pretend like he was the one who asked Emily for some help because he wanted to be a better boyfriend. And I guess she would have bought it because, that's how it works in toxic relationships. Episodes later instead, after Grett befriends Gabby and Yul quote-unquote fires Emily, Emily, mad as ever before, she could have gone up to Grett and told her the truth about Yul only pretending to be nice for his followers, giving Grett one more valid reason to break up with the guy. This would have been so cool, yet in the end, all this had no repercussions on their relationship, so what was the point? It felt like a random side plot they threw in just to give Yul something to do and have an excuse to fire Emily, who, by the way, she was a pretty useless character. She got fired only so she could plot revenge against Crystal, but all she did was free some scorpions, which could have been freed by Crystal herself as part of the challenge. After all, when Trevor and Derek did it in season 1, it didn't seem like that big of a deal, so she easily could have never existed to begin with. I don't see why she was so crucial to the story. I initially thought she would have like little segments of her interviewing the characters, making them talk with some fans from home or maybe their families. It would have been cool, but no, she was just there, basically an intern. Since he would later come back this season, I think it was a pretty good idea to eliminate Connor here, although, again, I kinda feel like they should have swapped his and Hunter's eliminations. After all, Connor wasn't really doing anything interesting anyway. Also though, elimination-wise, given how Team Yellow still had one more disposable member in Connor, disposable for the Alliance that is, I think it would have been way more satisfying to see the Alliance members agree to let Fiora and Ellie live another day by having Team Yellow lose on purpose to eliminate Connor. They could have sacrificed Connor to buy Ellie and Fiora some more time so that they could get someone else on their side and have some more allies for the next Cyan or Magenta ceremonies. Plus, it would have been a great way for Rhea to directly eliminate Connor by boasting in a confessional showing that she neither needs nor cares for him because she's evil and all that. Episode 7 is another pretty forgettable one. The challenge didn't really do it for me, both because the first portion had no reward, which made it irrelevant, and because the rest of the game wasn't particularly exciting either. The team dynamics too haven't really changed much, except for Ali and Jake starting to dislike one another, which kinda seemed to come out of nowhere, but it seemed like an interesting thing that could have been, explored in 1 or 2 episodes, and nothing more, not the whole season. I get that Jake is insecure and that Fiora tried to play mind games with him, but Twinkie Winky went from understanding Ali's issues with Hunter and relating to her to being jealous of her for being friends with Ashley in no time. It feels like there's no real catalyst, no real thing that started this rivalry, or not a significant one at the very least. I guess I would have been a little more interested in this conflict had both of them become closer and closer to Ashley and they had slowly grown jealous over time. I don't know, it was so sudden and it didn't really feel too justified. Especially because all of this ended up lasting 2/3 of the season, so the motive, the reason behind it, should have been something a little more significant. After last episode's kiss, Tom pretends to already have a boyfriend, thereby crushing Jake's little heart. Yet another plot point that seemed rather promising, but never led to anything. I expected something within Jake to snap, him blaming himself for being too slow and running out of time with Tom. That would have been such an interesting turn of events. Instead, he ended up feeling miserable up until Tom's elimination. They just stretched the storyline for way too long, when really, giving it less episodes not only would have sufficed, but also it would have made it work 100 times better, making it more concise and less frustrating. Talking about being repetitive, the team dynamics on teams Yellow and Magenta didn't bring anything new today either. Hence why I think we should have had a 3-way team swap sometime between episodes 5 and 7, I guess, to just keep the dynamics more interesting. Especially, I would have had Jake join Team Cyan just to speed up the confrontation with Tom and have the reconciliation happen way sooner. Because honestly, waiting 21 episodes for that is clearly just a way to convince Jake and Tom shippers to stick around up until the end, and not because they needed to spend 21 episodes apart, because this way they could grow each on their own. No, that's not really the case. As for Fiora, she was in a tough spot this season, something I really like to see. She was on a team with no allies and no one falling for her old tricks anymore. After all, her season 1 strategy couldn't really be used again to fool anyone. And even though she survived for quite a long time given her teammates, she didn't really strategize to stay so long. She was just very lucky. Her placement is great, don't get me wrong. I just wish she used her brain just a little bit more. She totally could have thought of a few different plans to save her own butt, but she preferred to just wait and see what would happen. It's Fiora we're talking about, the girl who eliminated basically everyone last season. I do wish she was used more, especially when it comes to her reconciliation with Alec. It really should have happened over more than just one single episode. So again, I think a team swap between the end of episode 5 and the beginning of episode 6, it would have been ideal. Moving Jake onto Team Cyan, Alec to Team Magenta, and maybe Gabby to Team Yellow so that she could watch Grett's relationship with Yul with a closer eye for a longer time, it would have been fantastic. Gabby and Grett would have spent more time together, making their friendship feel even more genuine. Jake, Tom, and Aiden's thing would have been sped up a little bit, and even Alec and Fiore would have gotten to spend some more time together. The team dynamics would have changed so incredibly much. That would have been so cool. Episode 8 had an interesting, very original and unique challenge with a super cool concept and a great potential, but not the best of executions. For instance, the challenge was set to involve puzzles in some sort of escape room fashion, but we barely saw any puzzles at all. We only saw the teams escaping one single room each, without even putting that much effort into it either. We just rushed the first portion of the challenge with the montage, as if seeing the campers solve the puzzles was superfluous. Which, infuriatingly enough, it was in the end, because apparently it didn't matter who completed the first portion of the challenge first. This is nonsense. I'm actually a great believer that challenges with multiple portions should grant a reward to the team or contestant who performs better on each stage. What's the point of having that first portion anyway? Same with the last challenge's first portion. It was completely skippable. And I guess if the writers don't have that many ideas as to what the campers can do during the challenge, then they could simply cut short the usual pre-challenge conversations, or even better, barely have any, and just move them, delay them a bit, and have them happen during the challenge. Have Jake have a breakdown when he's on the spaceship, or have Tom talk about his imaginary boyfriend as he's solving the puzzle. At the very least, those same conversations would happen in a more exciting context, and it would really mix up the usual episode format. I guess by now you guys spotted it too. It's always the same. We check on each team to see what's new and what isn't. Then there's the challenge, then a scene or two of the losing team deciding who to vote for, a few confessionals, we close with the elimination ceremony, rinse and repeat. Mixing it up is so very necessary, especially because some pre-challenge interactions are so very relevant. They're just a way to give each team a decent amount of screen time and nothing else. As for the second half of the challenge, again, the concept is interesting, but it's nothing really to write home about. Rhea, Jake, and Aiden did the very bare minimum to win there. Not to mention, it would have made 1,000 times more sense to see them sabotage one another and each try to get to the higher platform in a different and unique way. It's not like any of them were on good terms anyway. Why weren't they at each other's throats? Ellie too wasn't really used to her fullest potential this season. Although she competed for 8 whole episodes, she didn't really leave that big of an impact. I know this is not the case, but it kinda feels like she was supposed to leave much sooner because they didn't have anything planned for her, but because other campers were supposed to leave earlier for various reasons, she ended up staying for 8 whole episodes. Unfortunately, she left right as things on Team Cyan started getting interesting. How is it that redhead redemptionless and environmental instability here didn't have a falling out after Ellie lied to Gabby about the Villains Alliance? Why didn't she lose Gabby's trust and worked her ass off to get it back? After all, in the motel episode, Ellie mentioned that she's often too serious, always worried about her finances, so much so that she eventually forgot to enjoy herself. In the finale too, she seemed to learn that there's things that are worth so much more than money, so the writers evidently did have an interesting growth plan for her, so why rush it in just 2 minutes in the middle of episode 21? They could have taken their time and built up to it while she was still in the game, learning from Gabby perhaps. Ellie's elimination at least did create some interesting tension between Gabby and her teammates, something I was so very glad to see. In fact, as we're still on the subject, I think it was so very necessary for episode 9's challenge to, require the campers on each team to cooperate. That would have been such an excellent way to make the most of this tension between Gabby and the others. But would you look at that, this challenge has turns. Yay. It was definitely more exciting and a tad more complex than episode 4's challenge, so that's good at least. The twist of sending 2 teams to elimination tonight was actually pretty interesting, and actually, it kinda sucks that this is the only twist that ever happened pre-merge. Up to this point, there were no advantages, totems, team swaps, double eliminations, Absolutely nothing. And to think that in season 1, out of 7 pre-merge episodes, 4 had some twists in them. This pre-merge, All-Stars pre-merge, it really needed some. So many of these eliminations were either super predictable or not really that tense. Something you probably wouldn't want in an elimination-based show. With this unique ceremony, we lose Tess, who was the most useless character of the entire season. Really. Some characters might not have had plenty to do this season, but Tess did absolutely nothing. She couldn't have done less. I'm 100% sure that had Freckles here replaced Tess this season, very little would have changed, the consequences would have been the same. She had no arc, no journey, no interesting character trait, which is crazy. Why would you keep a character like that around for 9 whole episodes? That's almost half of the season at this point. I get that the writers probably didn't have anything planned for Hunter, so they just had to eliminate him earlier, but in the first version of the elimination order, Tess was supposed to get to the freaking finale, so did they have anything planned for her there, or did they mean to let her remain this irrelevant all season long? If that's the case, then I'm glad she didn't get to the finale. I'm sorry, I liked Tess, but this season, she became as forgettable as Ali was in season 2, and as much as I do not like her, I'm a firm believer that Rosa Maria should have replaced her this season. At least she could have been used wisely in Ria's arc, and she even would have made more sense as a friendly neighborhood therapist. Last season, Tess had 2 main things going on for her: her depression and her romance/love triangle/poly relationship with Hunter and Ali. All-Stars got rid of both, and in exchange gave her nothing. Absolutely nothing. She offered free moral and psychological support for her teammates, but anyone could have done that. And even then, it's not like the support she offered this season really changed much. It's as if she overcame her depression overnight, as if she never relapsed, and she's perfectly fine now, which is something I find so very hard to believe. Between episodes 4 and 9, for instance, they could have given her some time to shine and have her relapse. It's not like I want her to relapse, but it would have been more interesting than her doing nothing. Or at the very least, she could have talked to Gabby about their mental illnesses, sharing their personal experiences, and why it's important to seek help when you're facing a hard time. That would have been great for a younger audience to hear. Also, how is she and everyone else still ignoring Gabby's second personality? I've been expecting someone to help her out there for the longest time, but no one said anything. Apparently, the love triangle with Hunter and Ali is dead and buried, much to my disappointment, but at least they could have given her something else to do. I swear with the next episode, we're gonna be a little more positive. It's merge day at last, and we're finally shaking things up, with Gabby joining the villains and Jake being forced to cooperate with people he despises. Finally, I'm very grateful for this. Really. It's about Tom, we have new dynamics. Meh, this one didn't work too well. The challenge was fine, but the best thing about this episode is the elimination ceremony. Ashley's elimination really is unique, one of the coolest of the season, honestly. It was a twist both for the audience and for the heroes. I absolutely loved everyone's reaction as Crystal was reading all the Ashley votes. I think it was so very silly of Gabby to admit she's now siding with the villains, because I get that she doesn't strategize much, but it was a waste not to let her work in the shadows for at least an episode, instead of instantly admitting she's now siding with the villains. It even would have made Ashley's elimination more unexpected for the good guys, thinking they do have the numbers to at least force a tie, only to later find out Gabby sided with the villains all along. This is another wasteful plot point that could have made things way more interesting and Gabby's gameplay much stronger. It even would have made sense for the good guys to not vote altogether, even making Jake seem less like a petty idiot. The heroes would have thought there were 6 of them, the original 5 plus Gabby, against 4 villains, so they could afford 1 or even 2 people in case of a tie throwing their votes. That could have been fun. I admit, I didn't really have high hopes for Ashley initially, because after both Adventure Camp and Season 1, I couldn't see her as much of an actual character. She only ever bonded with Lil, Will, and Nick, all campers who didn't return in All-Stars, so I just couldn't see her by herself befriending other campers, so that's why I was so pleasantly surprised. Her friendship with Jake was so unexpected, yet so very enjoyable. She kept siding with him, taking him under her wing, teaching him to become a better person, yet without always holding herself back. She did tell him off when he was needed. Wish she had done that in this episode as well, but you know. Her send-off too was so very satisfying, especially given her bigger role in episode 11 too. The way she yelled at Rhea and the way she defeated Fiore once again, it did make her pretty badass. Honestly, she was one of the best characters of the season. I can't help but wonder what the season would have been like had she actually won, like in that first elimination order. I really need to know what the writers had planned for her in that first draft of the season. Who knows, that could have been so cool. Maybe that finale might have worked even better than the one we got. So, I don't know, an Ashley win, I didn't consider it at first, but why not? Had Lil, Will, and Nick also come back for this season, then absolutely I would have so wanted her to win. That would have been her season. Episode 11-2 is such a gem, very little wrong with this one. Actually, basically nothing was wrong with it. Having the remaining contestants partner up with the eliminated ones was such a breath of fresh air. I just love this challenge, this episode, everything was so cool. Gabby's split personality returned, Jake showed the first signs of growth, Ashley got even more closure than she initially got in the last episode, and I don't know, the challenge was so cool and original and entertaining, I loved it. Pretty much every conversation here was either packed with meaning or had an important purpose, unlike many of those repetitive and empty conversations pre-merge. For instance, Ellie suggesting Gabby should watch her back from the villains, something Gabby really needed to hear given how she doesn't really strategize much. Lake and Ashley's conversations with Skunkhair and Twinkie Winky respectively, making Jake and Aiden's incoming friendship way more natural, it really was needed. Alec and Fiore working together and smoothing things over, something that, again, was very rushed and could have been tackled a few episodes ago while the girl was still in the game, but something that I'm very glad happened nonetheless. There was so much they nailed with this episode, not to mention bringing back someone to shake things up was also a pretty great choice at this stage in the game. Especially seeing Connor fight back with so much grit and so much grit made it all the more interesting to watch, really. And even though it was pretty obvious he was gonna return, like pretty much since episode 6, you still felt like rooting for him just because of how hard he tried. It's really a shame that this is the very last of confident and super likable Connor we got. But again, not this episode's fault. Episode 10 marked the beginning of what I like to call the All-Stars Renaissance, and even though episode 12 is not as awesome as 10 and 11, it's still very good. Although one little detail that bothered me was that little montage there that took most of the excitement away from the challenge, especially because there wasn't too much action going on. There was that pretty great fight between Tom and Alec and Rhea, and then it felt like 10 kids playing capture the flag and going like, hee I stole your flag, haha, and I stole it from you. So let's say this is yet another instance where the villain's sabotage skills would have come in handy, really. It was very interesting to see the heroes band together and put up a fight against the villains alliance, and the tiebreaker too is another very strong suit of the episode. It actually made it gain quite a lot of points in my book. I guess though, I don't love that Tom got out here, because I would have much preferred it if Jake's journey had ended here and had Tom stayed in the game longer. This season, Tom didn't get to be the main character of his own story, but rather a side character in Jake's story, and therefore he didn't really get to shine on his own. This is why I think that eliminating Jake here instead of Tom, it would have been brilliant, because this way Jake's story wouldn't become too repetitive after this, and so that Tom would get some time to be on his own. Plus, it would have been cool to see him outlast Jake, just like Gabby outlasted Ellie this season. It's always fun to see the other half of the couple alone in the game. To easily get rid of Jake here, the villain simply could have predicted the heroes voting together tonight, and anticipating a tiebreaker, they could have decided to vote for one of the weakest heroes, aka Aiden or Jake. This way, of course, it would have been easier for them to beat them in case of a tie. To wrap up Jake's story, the writers could have had him make amends with Aiden and reconciled with Tom a little bit sooner. This way, the villains would have had one more reason to vote for him tonight, given how he, Aiden, and Tom would soon become an inseparable trio. As a consequence, Tom could have remained longer, and he could have brought more to the table between his broken friendship with Gabby, him helping out Aiden with challenges, or even physically challenging the villains. Ideally, at least, he can beat any of the villains in a 1v1 fight. Also, I don't know, this could have been a great chance for him to make use of his spy and cop training. How is it that this is barely brought up? And the one jail challenge he competed in, he lost too, so yeah, it's a waste to never have him use his training specifically in challenges. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more he could have done this season. He could have investigated the Villains Alliance in episode 5, as he said he would. This way he would have found out whether it was actually a thing or not. He could have tried to get along with Ellie for Gabby's sake, and even mended things with Gabby after she joined the Alliance. The possibilities were endless, really. And also I was a bit disappointed in him, because he used to be so emotionally mature in season 1. He really knew what he wanted in a relationship and how a partner should behave, but now he's a passive character who couldn't even work out the courage to talk to Jake in 2 whole years, and even after competing together for 12 episodes. I kinda thought they would reveal something huge there about Tom, about an old flame of his coming back, or an experience that scarred him for life. Maybe as soon as he became a cop, he arrested a mafia dude or a dangerous criminal who later escaped and swore to get revenge. Or maybe he could have shot a criminal and the guy's affiliates swore to avenge him, so he decided it was safer for Jake not to get involved with him in any way. That would have been so cool. I hoped it would be something huge. Instead, he was just anxious for the sake of Jake drama, I guess. So much wasted potential with this one. And to think that in my very first review of the season, I only asked one thing of Tom. One single thing. I wanted him to do something else other than get involved in Jake's relationship drama. And what's the one and only thing he did? Getting involved in Jake's relationship drama. I'm pretty disappointed in how he was used this season. He used to be my top 3 favorite characters alongside Gabby and Grett, and now he's really nowhere near them. Poor Tom. Episode 13 was epic. Love the challenge, love the theme, love the superpowers, love the fights especially. Finally, a challenge that was truly intense and felt like a lot was at stake. The main flaw of the episode I wouldn't say is the animation, which we can all agree could have been improved upon, but given that they're on a budget, I perfectly understand that this is the best they could do, which admittedly is still very impressive. Not flawless, but surely very impressive. I have more of an issue though with the sound design, because that's something that could have been improved easily without affecting the budget too much, but it really would have made a difference. A better sound design could have made up for the rougher animation as well, so simply by making the sounds fuller, more powerful and booming, and sometimes choosing better ones in general, along perhaps with the campers yelling a little bit more when they get hurt, that would have made it all way better. Also, the Connor and Ali versus Grett and Yul fight, it kinda would have worked better in my opinion had it actually had dialogues like the Jake and Aiden against Rhea one. It would have been so much cooler to actually see it unfold properly. The final boss too wasn't that threatening either, but these are just minor nitpicks really. If I mention these things, it's not because I didn't enjoy the episode, because it really was awesome, it's top tier. It's just, you know, some things that could have been improved upon. From a writing standpoint, the episode also works very well on its own, but I don't love the fact that the whole Grett and Yul conflict, it basically went nowhere for the longest time, and then all in one episode it evolved and ended right here, like super quickly. I'm not saying they needed to bicker for a long time before breaking up or something, but rather, after the breakup, I would have let Yul stay for at least one more episode. If it was up to me, I would have had both Grett and Yul win immunity for this round, letting them hate each other's guts for 1 or 2 more episodes before sending Yul home. That would have made for some really interesting content. Definitely more original than what Ali and Jake had going on. One more thing, I'm a tad disappointed Grett wasn't really shown taking matters into her own hands to orchestrate the whole elimination. Maybe she did do it, and maybe she went up to the heroes behind the scenes and asked them to vote for Yul, but I actually needed to see that. She really needed to be more involved in this elimination. It was payback time, and all she did was hitting him in the VR world, so he probably didn't even feel pain. Not because I wanted him to feel pain, but because he didn't really get punished enough for his actions, up until the grill thing. That was kinda too much. As for the rest, I never cared for Aiden, but his friendship with Jake this episode, it was actually pretty enjoyable. And even Gabby and Grett officially becoming friends, it just warmed my heart. About the narcissistic, misogynistic pig, I'm actually glad he stayed around for quite a long time this season, and I also appreciated the fact that in episode 19 they showed us some more nuanced version of his character, proving that he too has feelings of some sort. Which of course does not redeem him in any way, shape or form, but it makes him more realistic. He too must have some positive traits. He can't be all bad. Mostly bad, yes, but not entirely. I do wish though he got to be a little more villainous with his actions and not only with his words. I kinda wanted him to actually pull off a scheme without it later backfiring, like his plan to poison Aiden. I would have loved to see more of that. When episode 13 came out, I had very high hopes for the second half of the season. I thought maybe only the first half was problematic, and the season just needed to pick up the pace. And then, episode 14 came out. Per se, it's not as awful as everyone says it is, but it does have two huge problems: the challenge and Gabby's elimination. Doing a challenge about TikTok dances is not something the audience has been dying to see, is it? So how could we change the challenge? Well, the idea of the campers creating content for social media, it's actually intriguing. And if they wanted to include TikToks in the mix as well, then sure, why not? They could have each camper, each duo actually do something different. They could have Rhea and Aiden record TikTok dances, Ali do popular challenges with Jake, Alec and Connor could have done one of those 1-minute podcast / interview thingies, or maybe something along the lines of 30 facts about this that you didn't know. And Grett and Gabby could have done sketches of some sort. This would have added so much variety to the challenge, and it would have been not as cringy. Then Gabby's elimination too felt so very wrong because having the girls swap phones and Gabby accidentally throwing hers in the lake, it felt pretty lame, honestly. It doesn't feel like the right way to get rid of such a character. If you still want to get rid of her in a purge challenge, well then they could have tasked the campers with filming a video / TikTok in each of those 4 locations, and the camper whose content earns the least amount of views would be sent home instantly. Sending her packing because her content didn't perform as well as everyone else's seems a little more legit and easier to accept. After all, someone as famous as Rhea, Grett, or Aiden would have definitely succeeded easily. Also Ali, she's still popular, and someone like Jake or Alec, for instance, would have been just extremely popular just because they are in the fandom. Gabby's also very liked in the fandom, but perhaps not as much as Jake. And maybe a TikTok of someone like Alec doing something weird would become viral way easier than something that Gabby does. This elimination is not only problematic, in my opinion, because of how it went down, which was still outrageous, but also because it felt like the wrong time to get rid of Gabby. Mainly because she had just started learning to strategize. She even meant to backstab the villains before they could backstab her. She finally became friends with Grett, her second personality finally came back, and now you send her home? She just left ahead of time. Compared to most of the remaining campers, she had so much more going on. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a die-hard Gabby fan, but also because, objectively speaking, Rhea, Jake, Aiden, and in a way Ali and Connor too, they all overstayed their welcome. In fact, after Gabby left, these guys kept having the same old conversations about the same old topics we've talked about time and time again all season. The dynamics between Rhea and Connor and Ali and Jake did not change between episodes 14 up until episode 19. Plus, all these characters have already had their time to shine pre-merge, whereas Gabby, Yul, and Tom didn't, so why not keep them around a little longer? If I were to rewrite the season, I would give these guys a chance. After all, they barely got any spotlight up until episode 12. I admit, Gabby's villain arc was extremely interesting, and having a wild card like Gabby side with 4 of the show's most conniving villains, it was actually a very unique decision, yet at the end of the day, she's really only sided with them as an active member of the Alliance in just episode 10 and episode 12, which is really a shame because there's so much that could have happened by involving her more in it. Yet another character whose potential was wasted. I was so waiting for her to backstab the villains along with Grett, just like Ellie suggested, but no, that didn't happen, come on! It's also a shame that we never explored her split personality thing a little more in detail. One thing though that was handled remarkably well is actually her friendship with Grett. I still think it could have been developed over a longer chunk of the season, given how they only really started bonding between episodes 12 and 13 and Gabby left in episode 14, but that aside, it was such a pleasant development, unexpected even. In my previous retrospective I told you I would have loved it if they became friends, and they did! It was such a great surprise, I loved it. Episode 15 actually had a wonderful challenge. It's a great mix of a resistance challenge and personal questions where no interaction really felt irrelevant, and each question and answer was actually meaningful in some way. Although I kinda wish they had used smaller weights and asked a few more questions to just make the challenge last a little bit longer. This way the campers would have resisted while holding those weights a little bit more, because how did Alec just last one single round there? It doesn't feel right. Grett finding out just how strong she can be and developing a newfound confidence both during the challenge and in the final scene of the episode, you really couldn't help but root for her, especially after she did that pull-up. That was one powerful and perfectly executed scene, which actually makes her defeat in episode 17 all the more difficult to accept. Now, our buddy Aiden, I hope we can all agree, he lasted way too long. You know very well that I do not like him, but had he actually had a reason to stay, then I guess I would have said nothing. Again, had he actually asked Tom to help him train after James and Lake's elimination in order to get stronger and fitter, becoming more confident, just like Grett, showing the world that he can do this and he can win the season, I would have been really invested in this character journey. I might even have become fond of him, who knows? Yet, that did not happen. He too was just a side character in Jake's story and not really a character of his own. First he was just the catalyst that got Jake's jealousy started, then he became the target for Jake's frustration in the first half of the season. This way Tom wouldn't receive all the hate, something that was crucial in my opinion, because had Jake actually taken it all out on Tom, then it would have been too toxic of a relationship. And finally, he became some sort of tool used to give Jake some growth and redemption. I didn't mind their friendship, it made Jake way more likable and sympathetic, but it totally could have happened a little sooner. How to do that, you ask? By having that freaking three-way team swap that I mentioned before. Had they moved Twinkie Winky onto Team Cyan, they would have sped everything up with Tom and Aiden, and perhaps even have some interesting conflicts between him and Ellie. Episode 16's challenge has, yet again, a very cool concept, but the execution, yet again, leaves a lot to be desired. There's a few reasons. The first that comes to mind is Ali and Jake, who decided not to compete so they could fight like little kids. Come on, you two, it would have been way better had they actually sabotaged one another time and time again during the challenge, rather than doing this. I guess it would have made sense to have two players not even compete for a challenge when there's, I don't know, 16 campers left in the game. It's a good way to focus more on the contestants who need more screen time, but we're at the final 6 here. Having all 6 campers compete would have made everything way more intense. The puzzle portion of the challenge too was a little bit problematic, mostly because of how the puzzle only had 12 pieces. It was way too easy. As I mentioned in my review, I understand that animating and keeping track of 60 puzzle pieces for each camper, it would have been insane, but as some of you guys suggested, adding just a few more pieces, 8 more for instance, and making those puzzles entirely blank with no image to recreate, that would have made things much trickier. Either that, or they could have added some distractions during that part of the challenge, or we could have seen the campers destroying one another's puzzles, throwing some other pieces on the ground, maybe different pieces from different puzzles could have gotten mixed up. There were so many possibilities to make the puzzle portion more interesting, because that was very anticlimactic. Now, eliminating Alec like this, it was actually very smart, I admit. He at least didn't have a bullshit elimination. It actually made complete sense how Grett has been playing on both sides. I still think he would have been a way better finalist compared to those 3 we got, but if you just want to send him home, then I guess this is a good way to do it. Alec's character was so promising at the start of the season. He even rewatched season 1 to learn from his mistakes, so I was super hyped to see what he had planned for All Stars. Yet he didn't meet my expectations at all. Alec, explain what I mean. He formed the Villains Alliance, which really does him credit, but he barely did anything to keep it united. He kept talking about how hard he tried to keep the villains together, when in reality he did the bare minimum there. Also, given how he was the one who created the alliance, I expected him to have some plan as to how to use each villain's strengths to get further into the game, and even how to later use their weaknesses to get them out one by one as the finale approaches. All this without getting the remaining villains to actually see through him. After all, it's definitely easier to face Aiden or Jake in the finale rather than Grett or Rhea. So once he doesn't need a villain anymore, he could easily dispose of him by turning the others against him. I'm sure he would have been capable of such a strategy. His reconciliation with Fiore, it was actually something that we were all interested in, but again, it was so very rushed, and so was his friendship with Connor. In fact, they spent so little time together that this bond never really seemed that meaningful to me. Not to mention his kissing Rhea. I actually thought that would lead to some very interesting drama. Even Aiden thought so, hence why he wanted to tell Connor all about it, but then nothing happened. I don't know, I guess I expected Rhea to use her godlike acting skills to make Alec fall for her so that she could manipulate him a bit, or that Alec perhaps was actually the one pretending to like her, hoping that this way he wouldn't lose Rhea's allegiance to him now that Connor returned, or heck, maybe both of them could have pretended to be into one another to each get something out of it, only to later find out that the other person was also trying to trick them and use them. Alec had so much potential, but he ended up doing the bare minimum. Overall, he was an okay character, but it's not like his gameplay was so memorable that it will be remembered forever in the history of the show. It was fine, which is a shame because Alec is definitely capable of more than just fine. As for the totem, it's cool. Again, I would have introduced one more totem pre-merge as well, but yeah, this one was used very wisely and at a really good point in the game. Nice. Really cool challenge. Kinda wish Ashley could have been in it, she so would have dominated. Grett and her horse were so wholesome together, and even the reminder for the audience of how horrible Grett's parents are is just the cherry on top, really. However, yet again, it makes her elimination all the more outrageous. There's no way I'm stressing that concept enough, trust me. Jake was likable again after relapsing in episode 16. I really love seeing him so worried for Connor, happy to help him out and support him after the injury, and the horseback riding accident in particular, it was so surprising, but also an interesting key moment in Rhea's character journey. By deciding not to apologize to Connor, or do anything for that matter, and maintain her evil persona, she officially became impossible to redeem. It kind of feels like today, in this episode, she crossed the line she shouldn't have crossed. And by deciding to walk away, she kinda decided to seal her fate. I've actually been hoping for a very long time that Rhea would get redeemed, but there's just no way for her to recover from this, really. So at this point, I'm kinda glad they didn't redeem her after the accident, because it just would have been too forced. Grett's elimination, it still stings, really. I guess it made sense strategically, and given the writer's plans to let Rhea win, I suppose that it was for the best. Had Grett lost to Rhea in the final two, I would have been so outraged I probably would have caught on fire or something, so the whole Jake versus Rhea finale, it was definitely preferable given this ending they wanted to go for. Let me stress, once again though, that the Rhea ending is everything but preferable to a Grett win. That would have been a dream come true, really. I realized that for a good chunk of the season, Grett hasn't really been doing much, but once the merge came, she finally got the spotlights and grew over these past 7 episodes way more than Jake, Rhea, and Ali did over the whole season. So I agree that if we wanted Grett to win, then she really should have been more active during the pre-merge, but even as is, her victory still would have been more satisfying than Rhea's. Of course, had it been up to me, not only would I have made Grett win, but I also would have changed around this elimination order by having Yol, Tom, and Alec definitely in the final 5 along with Grett and maybe Ali. Overall, I think Grett is probably one of the very few characters that were handled almost perfectly this season. Of course, the timing of the Gruel relationship and breakup, it should have been tweaked and changed a little bit, but in general, it all worked out pretty well. She had an excellent character journey, and she's probably the best written character of the season, honestly, so hats off. As for Rhea, Jake, and Ali, hats on all the way. More on them in a minute or two. Episode 18, much like episodes 17 and 15, but also 20 and 21, is pretty well written. It even has a pretty great challenge. Not to mention, I do love the callback to the season 1 maze and the idea of collecting items belonging to the eliminated contestants. The only thing that bothered most viewers at this point was the campers left, because they've now run out of things to bring to the table. Don't get me wrong, their dynamics were interesting, and they managed to keep them relatively fresh. And again, had this been a team of 4 pre-merge, it would have been so cool, so much fun to see them interact. Yet, we've seen this a billion times, all of this. We've had enough. These characters have nothing else to offer, or rather, they could offer something else, potentially, but they don't do it. They always reiterate the same old conflicts without even changing them up a bit. Why couldn't Rhea at least spend an episode or two pretending to change and to like Connor again, only to betray his trust and crush his heart later on? That would have been a very original change of pace, but no, everything was so stagnant. I've already said in this video that I think some episodes work pretty well on their own, and this one does too. What I mean when I say this is that the episode is well written, the challenge and the interactions are interesting, the tension is palpable, and the dynamics are entertaining. But the moment you take the other episodes into account, this one doesn't feel that special anymore. It's just a repetition of what we've already seen. Had there been a recent shift in the story where Connor just started trying to get Rhea to change like last episode, and Ali and Jake only recently began to bake her, then this episode could have been awesome, flawless even, I don't know, but this is not the case. So if in a few months I decide to rewatch episode 18 only, just for the sake of nostalgia, just this one episode, I'm sure that I'm gonna appreciate it and really enjoy it. But if I were to rewatch the whole season again, by the time I get to it, I would be frustrated and nothing else. Many episodes are strong, but only when they're considered on their own. Altogether, as a whole, they're not. They kinda fall flat. Even here, it's not like I could find that many things wrong with this one. It's just the previous episodes that kinda ruined this. It sucks that Connor quit, because quitting at the final 4 is just so anticlimactic, but of course it's a good thing he didn't compete in the finale. It was clear he was not gonna win, and it's not like he could have done that much. It's also a shame that, because of this, we basically skipped the last elimination ceremony of the season. However, it was pretty cool to see Crystal ask the campers to share their thoughts before the ceremony. I do wish they'd done that a few more times during the season. Preferably not every time, just sometimes. Despite appearing in almost every single episode, Connor was pretty much the den of the season. I do like the guy, and I did initially want him to have a pretty good placement and all, but his stay, it really didn't need to be that long. He could just as easily not have returned in episode 11 and nothing would have changed. He was a waste of a spot, I'm sorry to say that. Of course I get why he was there, they wanted him to try time and time again to change Rhea and fail miserably each time. I guess yeah, it was necessary given the finale they had planned, but he also could have done something else in the meantime. Had this been a 13 episode season, then maybe it could have worked. Yeah, I can see that. But with 21 episodes, it didn't really work. I didn't love that his whole thing this season was just attempting to change Rhea, because it would have been more interesting to see him do something else other than that. For instance, get over that sort of imposter syndrome he had. It would have been so cool if he grew more motivated and found the drive and energy to get his head in the game, hoping to eventually win it, not for the money, but for himself, to prove himself. That would have been so awesome. Instead, this version of Connor we got, he's okay, but not that interesting. The motel episode does have its moments and an original premise. They brought up some pretty original matters and plot points, but maybe they didn't really develop them much. They just gave us a glimpse of what's been happening in the motel, but there wasn't much of a story. It felt more like a montage of wholesome moments. So maybe it's me, maybe I always expect a very impactful and original storytelling in each episode, but perhaps not every episode needs that. If they wanted to make an episode that's just chill, without maniacal attention to detail behind it, then the motel one is ideal for that. Still, it's a shame we didn't get to explore some new dynamics that just couldn't have taken place while the campers were still in the game, be it because they were divided into teams, or because the elimination order didn't allow them to interact much. For instance, the Ellie, Gabby, and Grett trio. It seems Ellie isn't too fond of Grett, so it would have been so cool to see her warm up to her during the challenge. But even the whole thing of Ellie realizing she's been obsessing over money too much, I guess I wouldn't have minded seeing her go through a little arc in this episode as she forgets about the money and just decides to have a good time for once. And even Yule's little introspective afternoon there, it was also very refreshing to watch. I always thought he was the one character who just could not have any redeeming qualities or non-negative traits, but this episode proved me wrong. I do like how the guy can easily make things tense and generate all kinds of conflict, but knowing that he feels a tad bad for the way he behaves, it makes me like his character more. Not the person, he's still a piece of crap, but his character is indeed a little more complex. I admit I couldn't care less for these final 3, but the episode, it was actually very enjoyable. Except maybe for the twist elimination maybe. A twist like this would have worked way better for a premier challenge in my opinion, where perhaps a team loses just because of an oversight like this one, but the mix-up or the accident doesn't necessarily determine the elimination of a specific camper. It all still depends on the team's dynamics and whom everyone decides to vote for. Doing it for a purge challenge feels a little lamer. The challenge was rather exciting to watch, and the interactions quite fun. I absolutely loved Fiora and Yul as helpers, whereas James's presence, it was so irrelevant. I initially thought he and Jake would eventually work things out or something, but nothing really happened between them. We just saw James grow fond of Twinkie Winky because of his selfless actions, which I wouldn't want to say this is the first time he behaved so wholesomely, but it's definitely something that he didn't do that often this season. One good thing he could have done could have been helping Ashley feel less guilty for the farm fire she talked about. He actually could have been the one there to comfort her actively for once. Had he actually done a few more of these kind and selfless gestures, then yeah, I would have liked this a little better. Jake and Ali getting along sure was refreshing to watch after a buttload of episodes of them fighting constantly and often for no reason, although I do not buy that they only started to get along now to honor the promise they made to Connor. They failed to work together countless times, causing so many people to unnecessarily get the boot, so the fact that they only now started doing it felt way too sudden. Connor's farewell did not feel that cathartic for them, honestly. Ashley's instead, yeah, it was, but his, not really. Also, the scene of the two of them at the start of the episode bonding, it almost made me buy this friendship, but the way Rhea turned them against one another, only for them to go back to working together a few minutes later, without even confronting one another about the letter thing, it felt very random, and it really confused me, really. I don't get how any of that is supposed to make sense. The ideal thing here would have probably been for the two of them to see through Rhea's lies, thereby learning to trust one another and strengthening their budding friendship or whatever they have going on there. Now, when I said that I wish Jake had gone home around episodes 12 or 13, it's also because that way he would have managed to mend things with Aiden, but not with Ali. I don't really think he needed to. After all, we can't all be friends, especially someone like Jake. Come on, he can't be on good terms with everyone. It would have been more realistic for him to make some friends during his stay on the show, but at the same time make quite a few enemies as well, like Ellie and Ali. I'm not saying that I don't like the idea of Ali and Jake going from enemies to friends, it's always a nice trope, but this very storyline had already happened with Aiden and Jake just a few episodes ago. It was kinda redundant to have Jake also go through that same character journey with Ali as well. Not to mention, with Aiden, the writers did it right. It didn't feel forced. With Ali though, it did. The way they put their differences aside was so abrupt that I didn't believe it. I don't believe it. Also, I don't mind a good rivalry, it can always make things entertaining, look at Ellie and Jake, but this one was too childish. It really felt forced. And what's worse, the writers gave priority to Ali's rivalry instead of actually giving it to her personal issues. She spent way too much time being insufferable and some sort of Jake 2.0 rather than actually going through the character journey she was supposed to experience. That's because Ali, in my opinion, had a whole lot of potential. When the writers decided to finally give her a personality this season, they actually picked very interesting character traits. Her parents thinking she should get a real job, people telling her her problems are not big enough, her relationship issues, her facing hate comments, and the stress of being a content creator, feeling judged and in need to prove herself because she cares way too much about other people's opinions. Those were all excellent ideas. Again, the season has so many fantastic concepts, and this is one of them. However, none of these stories were really explored in detail to a satisfying degree or developed in a linear way. I don't see much of a growth in Ali's character, honestly. The only thing they elaborated on a bit was the hate comments thing, which it was always mentioned, but it never really went anywhere. They finally decided to do something with it when she and Connor talked about it in episode 18, but their conversation there, it didn't feel like a cathartic character moment. It didn't seem like Ali acted any different after they talked. It didn't seem the end of that chapter for her, because it was just one single conversation that happened kinda out of nowhere and didn't seem to leave any impact on her or on the audience. That to me felt like a really good start, but that's all we got. It's a good start, then elaborate more on it. Let's not forget Hunter and Tess were the only two characters Ali ever really bonded with before, so the fact that Hunter left almost immediately and that Tess barely even acknowledged Ali's existence, it felt like a waste. Connor sure is great, and so is Ashley, but wouldn't it be more appropriate to have her discuss and solve her personal problems with the help of Hunter and Tess instead? Wouldn't it have made more sense for her to hear what Connor said from Tess instead? Something like that, coming from her best friend, it would even feel more wholesome. It also seems weird to call them best friends because they haven't really seen each other much over the past year and they haven't interacted this season either, so we can say they are very good acquaintances. The final episode's challenge was so very cool. The first half allowed for many fun interactions, and the second one, it just felt appropriate, you know, having a one-on-one fight for the very last challenge. Yeah, it was awesome. The animation could have been a little bit smoother and the fights a tad more intense, so if Odd Nation Cartoons had a few more bucks to spend this season, then they absolutely should have used them on this final challenge, but overall, it all worked just fine. With Ria's victory, they went in an interesting direction, and again, Jake being everything but a perfect character made Ria's victory easier to accept and way less outrageous. Still, this episode would have worked much better had Ria's character arc been, you know, a little more elaborate. So I'd say this finale both hits and misses at the same time, because the episode by itself, it works just fine. The concept is very unique and the story is an interesting cautionary tale, but the way Ria's character was handled doesn't really make the finale heart-wrenching or make the audience empathize with her. Again, episode 21 is most certainly not responsible for that, because here she was written very well. It's the rest of the season that didn't do her justice. We'll have a lengthy discussion about her in a minute, but let's tackle Jake first, because I said that I would follow the elimination order, so I'm following the elimination order. It's what I do. What's there to say about Jake that hasn't been said yet? He's definitely a character that stands out from the crowd, and I guess I never really minded his whole gist. I just believe, and I think we can all agree, that he got way too much focus this season. Not even Miriam in season 1 or James in season 2 got this much relevance in each and every single episode. In small doses, he makes for very good drama and causes some pretty interesting conflicts, which is awesome, but his character is one that quickly tires people after a while, so giving him so much spotlight all season long, it wasn't really ideal. This doesn't mean that he possibly couldn't go far or even make it to the finale. After all, Grett too didn't get that much screen time, but she still made it to the final 5 and she would have been excellent finalist material as well, so I don't necessarily have an issue with his placement, but rather with the humongous amount of screen time and focus he got. It got tiring to watch after a while. Of course, it doesn't help that his character journey was not that linear. Most relationships and character developments this season were not linear, but on paper, that's fine. Who says we have to change on the spot and never relapse? That's a very human thing. Relapsing once or twice is normal and it makes for good content. Relapsing every other episode instead, it might even be realistic. Some people really struggle to change and get better. They gotta bang their head against the same old wall time and time again, and it can be realistic. That doesn't make for good or interesting content, it's too repetitive. Had his insecurities been condensed into just 10 episodes or so, where he's initially very insecure and making enemies left and right, but later learned to be more confident and make peace with some of the people he turned against him, making amends, that would have been splendid and a very good use of his character. It seems he was always meant to change for the better, but the way he changed on the show was very underwhelming, because I don't think we can definitely say without the shadow of a doubt that he has learned from his mistakes and is a brand new person now. He seemed to make really good progress between episodes 11 and 13, but he kinda ruined it all in episode 14, 16, and then 18 again. And even pre-merge, he seemed to become a much better person, only for him to fall back into his old habits like one episode later. I still don't hate or dislike him, just like I don't hate any characters here. I'm not fond of Aiden, but I don't hate him. I just think he got way too much screen time and really overstayed his welcome. I get that he is the insecure guy, and I'm okay with devoting 10 episodes or so to that, but is that really all he could have done this season? Whether or not you like the direction the writers have picked for Ria's story, you have to admit the message is pretty good, and letting her win yet somehow lose at the same time is appealing. Once again, it's the execution though that needed to be fixed. Ria here never seemed to truly regret or even regret her actions, or feel genuinely and truly ashamed or bad. The only times she showed some actual human emotions, she didn't truly feel sorry. Her looking concerned after doing something despicable might work when she I don't know, trips someone, not really when she leaves them to die or injures them severely. Had she actually felt a genuine sentiment there, she would have said or done something about it, or at the very least, she would have asked herself whether she's crossing the line or not. She could have shown signs of weakness in her confessionals, or perhaps sometimes forgotten to stay in character and play the role of the villain. Imagine if we saw her acting nicely, rushing to Connor's aid after the accident and try to help him out, saying she's so sorry, only for her to later see the cameras, realize what's going on, switch back to villain mode and just pretend those genuine emotions she shared were just all fake and a way to mess with him. The fact that she didn't show any of those emotions, if not with some facial expressions, it means that she's not that remorseful. A sad or worried look on her face feels more like the normal human reaction anyone would have when seeing another human being in pain or danger. So this makes her human, clearly, but not sorry. She was just an ass for so long that I couldn't feel bad for her in the end, or at any point during the story. Now, putting her character and its writing aside, I think this finale fundamentally had one big problem, and it's that Rhea didn't have any friends or connections this season. The finale would have hit much harder had she actually had something else to lose other than Connor. Her story this season started with her already not having any friends or allies by her side. Plus, she didn't make any new friends as the season progressed, so in the end, she really had no one to lose except Connor, which makes the whole idea of picking fame and money over the solid bonds she previously established and cared for so deeply way less touching. In fact, had this All-Stars arc actually happened in season 2, then it really would have worked much better. After all, there, she decided to backstab Blake and betray Rosa, plus other than Connor there, she even had Carol's support as well. So imagine if she lost that too. That's already 4 people and 4 solid connections she could have thrown down the toilet. Such a finale would have hit much, much harder. Also, I still don't hate this ending, and I don't mind that Rhea won, but I am convinced that her arc and her refusing to be redeemed, it actually could have worked just fine, if not even better, had she actually lost in the finale. And because a Jake win wouldn't really have been the best scenario ever, I think that an ideal finale would have been a Jake versus Rhea versus Grett finale, with Jake losing in the final 3 and Grett ultimately defeating Rhea in the final duel. Rhea still would have lost it all, including the money this time, but the idea of having a redeemed villain like Grett win in her place, it might have hit Rhea like a ton of bricks. It definitely would have hurt her 1,000 times more than the actual finale we got. The concept wouldn't have been exactly the same, it wouldn't have been a money can buy friends sort of thing, but more of a being evil and a phony got you nowhere, whereas those who actually had the courage and strength to be themselves and accept themselves improving despite it all, they ended up prevailing. That would have been another powerful message, and the lesson for Rhea would have remained pretty much the same. As for the staff members, let's spend a few words on them too. I realize I haven't really talked about them too much today. They've all been very forgettable. I didn't really connect with anybody. Crystal's struggles with the show seemed to only start taking a toll on her very late into the season, and for no specific reason. Like, there was no specific relevant reason that made her decide to quit. She was more like, oh, there are so many things to keep track of, oh my, I can't do this. And now even Emily's being problematic, I can't do this. Oliver was barely part of the season and didn't do anything relevant. Emily might as well not have existed, as we said. Marcus and Nina didn't even actively partake in a challenge, Nina especially. Such a wasted character. And finally, no matter how hard I tried, I never got invested in Derek and Trevor's romance. Luckily, Trevor's sentimental issues weren't brought up every single episode, so that story didn't really drag, but it kinda felt unnecessary, I don't know. I don't mind it, but I'm not crazy about it either. Also because I would have been fine with the two of them just staying friends. I don't get why there have to be so many romance plots in this show. It's not like romantic relationships are the only entertaining stories. You don't have to get every character involved in one. Out of 20 grown-up characters and 7 staff members, only 6 people were not involved in any kind of love story. And 2 of these 6 are either grandmas or puppets, so yeah, no. That's another reason why I like Lake. She doesn't need no romance to have an interesting character journey, and neither do Miriam or Fiore. But that about wraps it up. I guess I've been a little harsher this time compared to my last retrospective, but you guys know that I mean well when I point out these things. I love the show, love the creators, all the effort everyone puts into it, love it absolutely. In fact, at the end of the day, I still enjoyed the season very much. I never lost interest. Every time a new episode would come out, I was always there, curious and trying to avoid spoilers the whole time. I just wanted to experience the whole thing the right way. So it was a fun season. It also had a good amount of Gabby and Grett, so I'm very grateful for that too. I don't think it's right to say it was a perfect season, but it's also unfair to say that it was awful and terrible and whatnot. Some people just exaggerate there. Now it's your turn to talk, so let me know your thoughts on the season in the comment section. Of course, the longer the comment, the better. And if you watched the entire video all the way through this time as well, then please write "grateful to be here" in the comments below. Those of you who do will have a very special place in my heart. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the longest I've ever talked in any video of mine, so thank you all for sticking around, and I'll see you guys next time, hopefully as we discuss season 4. See ya, ciao!